ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This episode as part of our Halloween Spooktacular, where we're revisiting some of our favorite horror movies of yesteryear. We are looking at Tom Holland's 1985 movie, Fright Night.
Hey, but before we begin, if you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, it would be a great favor to us if you went ahead and hit the subscribe button and ding the little bell next to it. That way you'll be notified every time we upload a new review. And while you're there, why don't you go ahead and just like the video? It helps us with the algorithm and gets Deep Dive Movie Reviews out to a wider audience. And just a reminder, we do spoilers here, so you have been warned. James, I'm so looking forward to talking about one of my favorite Halloween Spooktacular favorites, Fright Night.
Well, I thought for this one, I would hand off to you to start us off, because I have the sneaking suspicion that you are more familiar with this film than I am, and that it might mean a little bit more to you than to me. Not to say I didn't like it, because there's lots to like, but why don't you go ahead?
If you're not familiar with the movie, Fright Night tells a story of... This is not going well. Let's start again.
Okay, so those of you who aren't familiar with the story, Fright Night is the story of a typical sort of suburban teenager, Charlie Brewster, who begins to suspect that the new neighbor who has moved in next door is not the charming, debonair Jerry Dandridge that he claims to be, but is in fact a vampire. His single mother doesn't believe him. His friends, his girlfriend don't believe him. So he turns instead to Peter Vincent, who is a kind of late night horror movie presenter, washed up actor turned Tales of the Crypt style, sort of TV raconteur, if you like, but who has this sort of legacy of being the great vampire killer. So instead he turns to him for help, and they kind of find in each other sort of perhaps the team that they need in order to vanquish this threat to their neighborhood.
James, you did that so well. Viewers out there need to know that I attempted to do a synopsis because I love this movie a bit more than James, and in the end James had to do it because I just kept screwing it up. So fantastic synopsis. James, this is a family favorite for me. It's something my father loves, my mom loved, my brothers loved. We have a shared love in this film. So whenever I watch it, it really brings back a nostalgia for my childhood in the 80s. And I've just rewatched it for this and introduced my soon-to-be 12-year-old son to it. And now he's walking around the house, coming up to us around the corner going, "Welcome to Fright Night, for real." If I've heard that once, I've heard it about 30 times in the last week since we watched it.
Welcome to Fright Night. For real.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't know why this one is one that I kind of sort of missed at the time. I mean, I recognize the poster, from the video cover. It was always there on the shelf, at the video shop, but it just wasn't one that we watched. Back in the day, I would watch Lost Boys and Goonies and movies like that, which kind of all came around the same time. But we weren't a big horror movie household. I was only really put onto some of these films by my older sister, and then later when I was packed off to boarding school, then that's when you get sort of exposed to all kinds of things. And so this one never really, I didn't watch it as a teenager. It was as simple as that. I never saw it until much later, when it was a catch-up watch rather than a movie about characters my age. Although it's funny you should say that, because these actors are old for playing teenagers, particularly like Amanda Bierce, God bless her, but she's about 27 in this, and I wonder whether how much of that is so that it's not completely inappropriate when Chris Sarandon is trying to seduce her, or whether that's just how it worked with teen movies back in the day. But there's some pretty old teenagers in this movie.
Right. Well, I think what works in this film, James, is that, we just recently reviewed for a Halloween Spooktacular Gary Oldman in Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. And there's elements in this film that are mined from the classic film. You have the seductive vampire who is going after the protagonist, who is almost a Jonathan Harker. Charlie Brewster is the Jonathan Harker character, whose girlfriend is the reincarnated, or at least in the mind of the vampire, of the lost love that had been lost centuries in the past. So there is these elements where, and then of course Charlie Brewster has to team up with the Van Helsing type character who's known as Peter Vincent in this rendition. But the classic tropes are mined by Tom Holland in this film. And I think that's what gives the film the structure that made it the success that it's been for all these years.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. It's. I'm not going to say that.
You absolutely agree.
Like, Sure, it takes, like you said, the elements of Dracula. I mean, he's not Dracula, but it takes the elements of Dracula that make that character who it is. But then it is also this kind of cocktail of other kinds of movies. It is a typical 80s sort of almost John Hughes style teen movie as well. You know, you have the guy who's got the girl who, are they going to go all the way, and she's reluctant, but then when he gets distracted, she's saying like, well, hang on a minute, I was just playing a little bit hard to get. They got the goofy best friend who kind of knows more about this stuff, but is, let's be honest, weird. It's a very very strange choice of performance by Stephen Jeffries in this movie as Evil Ed, the kind of the sort of the goofy reject, if you like, outcast.
But again, he's almost a Renfield-ish type character. He's insane. He's crazy. That element is still there in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes it easier for the audience when he inevitably is turned. You know, because one of these characters has to kind of go all the way, as it were. And so, yeah, let's give it to Evil Ed, because he's kind of partway there anyway. And then, yeah, you've got Peter Vincent, Roddy McDowell, the great Roddy McDowell, as this kind of Van Helsing character who kind of grounds or gives the story the kind of mythological backstory. You know, he fills you all in on what works, what doesn't work, the rules, if you like, of the game. And although he takes some convincing, he's the one that says, oh, okay, yeah, sure, these really are vampires, and this is how we're going to do. So it's this great balance. You know, you've got classic Dracula story, you've got a teen high school movie, you've also got sort of gooey 80s practical makeup and blood effects, which were, you know, all over movies like this at that age. And, you know, the combo works really well.
The nostalgia for this film, James, and I don't know whether on the other side of the pond you would have this kind of character, but the Peter Vincent character is one I resonate with because we had our version of it growing up in the Detroit area. We had Sir Graves Ghastly, who was played by this local actor on Saturday afternoons, and he would introduce, you know, some Peter Cushing or Vincent Price type horror film on that schlocky 50s, 60s, 70s type of B film. And he was the character. He would come out of the coffin and, hello, I am Sir Graves Ghastly, and welcome to my, you know, on today's show, we're going to be showing that horror spectacular. And so Peter Vincent, of course, is playing that type of character. The name itself is an homage to Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. So, yeah, again, I'll say Tom Holland mines not only some of the best from Bram Stoker's Dracula, but some of the best experiences that particularly somebody of my age would have had growing up with these types of characters.
Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge, we didn't really have a kind of Peter Vincent style character. We didn't have nearly so many TV channels anyway, and the regional stuff I don't think really sort of put on much of that kind of
and that's the key thing. It was always very regional. Growing up, I thought everybody would know who Sir Graves Ghastly is. He's the biggest thing. And then you find out now, like Peter Vincent, this is like local cable, very local city. You're a big voice in a small pond. But
sure, you travel 100 miles and you're not even on TV anymore.
Exactly.
Something like
exactly.
That. Yeah, so I mean, normally, we didn't really have anyone like that, but we're familiar with the concept, you know, Tales from the Crypt and all of that kind of stuff. We would get occasionally, or at least I would get occasionally, but you know, it's a fairly understandable and universal kind of idea. And it also just kind of, it makes sense. You know, you need the kind of the slightly eccentric, you know, learned expert who isn't taken seriously, and it's only the kids. You know, you see it in a lot of kind of sort of children's stories, that there's always like the older guy that they have to go to, who's the old man who lives on his own in the thing, and but he was like, oh, when I was your age I had to do the same thing. And so you know, so you kind of get all of that. I also really appreciate the kind of, I suppose it's a kind of rear window element to all of it, is that you know, Charlie is spying on the neighbors and sees the guy hooking up with all of these pretty ladies that come through the door, and then they turn out to be the next victim in these murders that are happening somewhere. And he's like, I know what's going on, and obviously no one believes him until it's far too late.
I need to, as a disclaimer, and I said I showed this to my almost 12-year-old son, there was moments in this film where we told him to close his eyes, or we fast forwarded really quickly, because not everything is 12-year-old appropriate in this film.
No, were they the bloody bits or the sexy bits?
This more the sexy bits. I think more the sexy bits, you know. Yeah. But you know what I want to say is, I think Chris Sarandon plays one of the best vampires in any film, hands down. In fact, I would only say, I'm trying to think who other than Gary Oldman I would think is comparable a vampire. I love Chris Sarandon's Jerry Dandridge is the name of the vampire in this film. And it was interesting. I was just listening to a podcast by Michael Rosenbaum, who played Lex Luthor in Smallville. He has a very successful podcast. I've been listening to it for a number of years now. And he just had Chris Sarandon on last week, because Michael Rosenbaum is a huge Fright Night fan. And he was talking to Chris Sarandon, who is 80 years old now. Shows you how old this film. He just celebrated his 80th birthday. Sounded wonderful, though. But when they were talking Fright Night, he had recently come off of getting his Best Actor nomination for Dog Day Afternoon. And he'd been in a couple other high-profile films. And so he said, I had a bit of a big head at the time. And so when I got past the script for Fright Night, I was like, no way, I'm too big to be doing this schlocky horror type stuff. And the person who gave him the script says, no, you really need to read the script. And he said, within a few pages, I thought, oh, this is really good. This is something I want to do. And ironically, other than Dog Day Afternoon or Princess Bride, this is probably the role he's most identified with.
I would say, actually, without a doubt, this is the film that people know him from most of all. I mean, he got an Oscar nomination for Dog Day Afternoon. But
there was other big stars in that.
Yeah, I mean, that's Al Pacino's movie. You know, when you think of that movie, you think of Al Pacino and John Cazale. You don't think of Chris Sarandon immediately. I would say. No. So I think this is the movie that people kind of know him for, and it's certainly what I know him for. But to think that he's 80 years old now and still going, you know, he's still doing new movies now. Yeah.
He sounded great on the podcast too. He sounded very energetic. He's got new projects in the pipeline. He's good to go. So
I do want to talk one thing about the sexy bits, if I may, because I thought that they handled that in a really kind of interesting way, because there's that whole sequence at the nightclub, you know, on the dance floor. There's the nice little motif where she's looking at herself dancing with him in the mirror, and she's just kind of spinning around on her own, and so she's realizing, but she kind of does it anyway. You know, and I think it plays with it really well, because obviously she's incredibly frustrated. You know, she's presented as a sort of somewhat frigid girlfriend, should we say? And but then you realize that no, she's taking her time, and when Charlie says something about it, she immediately is like, okay, fine, let's do it. And it's at that moment that he's distracted by the vampire next door. So you get the idea that she is somewhat curious, and she's at the moment, she's kind of like readied herself for the moment. And it really, I thought, handled that moment well, where we were talking about it when we talked about Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, where, you know, the vampire lore and these interactions, a vampire attack is as much sexual as it is violent. And here it really shows you how it's this idea of making her bleed without killing her. And obviously the illusion is that you're taking her virginity. But I think that it sort of illustrates that just in a really kind of smart, very subtle, doesn't overstate it, but you get exactly what's happening and how important this is, what a threat this is, not only to her, but to their relationship. And I just felt that it was actually handled really well in this movie, compared with how it's handled in a lot of sort of vampire movies, where it's often sort of dashed off, or it's made really, really erotic, super sexy. Here, you get the intimacy, you get the line being crossed, and you're like, oh, I get it. Yeah, this actually means something. I thought it was done really well.
Now, I wonder if that has anything to do with 80s sensibilities too, of a more conservative America in the mid 80s. There had been kind of a response to the more liberal 60s and 70s. We had Reagan's America coming in. And so I'm wondering too, if there was a conservative element there that kind of toned down certain measures of the sexuality. But like you said, it's everything's conveyed, but maybe in a little more creative and nuanced way.
Yeah, no, I just thought it was done, it was done really well. It wasn't sort of overly subtle or anything, but it also wasn't overly overt. And you're reminded that, we care about her, we care about this character, but that line is going to be crossed.
Yeah.
The connotation is that he did sleep with her or whatever, because she wakes up afterwards and she's completely different. She suddenly kind of looks her age. She looks like an adult. Hair's all done differently. She's wearing a much more seductive outfit, and you're kind of like, oh, she is a woman now. She's not a teenager anymore. And I just thought, I've seen it done obviously many, many times, and I felt it was done pretty effectively and not too patronizingly in this one.
It was Chris Sarandon who brought that change in her, not Charlie Brewster.
Well, can't argue with that.
Obviously this was a pre-CGI film, and I love real special effects. I thought some of the transformations in the vampire are some of the best. And like I said in our review of Gary Oldman in Dracula, this conveys, even though he is in his human form, a seductive, good-looking man, we are never left with the impression that this is something that would be desirable. He is a beast, and you see the beast come out of him. You see the transformation. You see what he really is inside when he doesn't have the facade of this, character. And it's been to my chagrin, of where a lot of vampire film and TV series have gone subsequently in the last 20 years, making vampirism this beautiful, desirable thing where you'll become sexier, you'll become stronger, all the chicks will dig you, and there's no bestial element, there's no earthiness to it, there's no cursed. You're not doomed to be alone and cursed. You are the most popular kid in the class when you become a vampire, which I think reflects some of our times. But I prefer the cursed character who is grounded in that earthen beast.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think something like Twilight is definitely giving off the wrong message. Where
and it's not just Twilight. They're not the Vampire Diaries and the Immortals. They're all just beautiful people who, even to a degree, the Underworld. Series.
They've turned them almost into kind of superheroes.
Yes.
You just get more powers and you live forever and you look super hot and you dress really cool. And
there's no negative side effects, because even the taking of blood can be mitigated in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think here, it is still part of the course, it is still the cautionary tale of don't have sex because it's this sort of evil thing. But I think
bad things will happen. Bad things will happen.
But I think the film does it really, really well. I do love the practical effects. And it's not even on Chris Sarandon where I think they work best. I think the transformation sequence where Evil Ed turns back from a wolf into his human form after he's skewered on the banister is pretty incredible. And then when Amy changes at the end into this kind of sort of bride of Dracula almost,
she gets some
the really sort of exaggerated teeth and jaws and fingers, which is the image off the poster. I mean, you can't, with CGI that just wouldn't have the same impact. I mean, there when you're looking at it, that you can touch it and you can feel it, and that it will it will hurt when it penetrates.
You know they're gooey and they're saliva-y, and it's CGI just communicates too much of a comic book. If I'm watching a cartoon, whereas yes, the transformations in this are very real. I particularly like the first time Jerry Dandridge, Chris Sarandon, is invited into the house. And he's got this wonderful, I'll be coming around a lot now. But when he first confronts him in the room and he gives him the choice, I'm going to give you something I didn't have myself. I'm going to give you a choice. And when he tries to stab him, he's just, you fool. And again, it's communicating, this is not something that's desirable. This is something that was forced on me. Again, going back to your metaphor of sex, probably somebody violated his virginity at one point, turned him into something he didn't want to be, and now he's going to give this guy a chance. But obviously,
and I think an extension of that sequence is the fact that he's being incredibly threatening by being just sort of sexually superior. His charisma and his handsomeness and his just alpha maleness. The way that his mother, Charlie's most treasured person in the world, arguably, is just falling all over him, swooning and falling, and he's just like, I'm not doing anything, and yet I am just oozing threat, from every pore, and and it's a really important part of sort of vampire lore, is that it's sexual. I think it is sexual superiority and sexual dominance that really is one of the strongest parts of what a vampire brings to the table. And I think this film plays with it really, in a really fun way. I like it.
And it was remade in 2011 with Colin Farrell playing the vampire character and David Tennant from Doctor Who fame playing the Peter Vincent role. And
I think it was Anton Yelchin, wasn't it? The dearly missed Anton Yelchin as the
who played
as the main character, Charlie Brewster.
And that was a good remake. To me, it doesn't hold up, or doesn't have the timelessness of the 85 version, but it was a good movie.
I remember it being pretty decent. It doesn't eclipse this one at all, but Colin Farrell is a pretty good Chris Sarandon stand-in. He has that same sort of appeal and charisma and attraction that makes every woman in the room, and some of the men, probably weak at the knees, without him actually having to do anything. And I think that's what the character needs, for sure.
I think, and coming back to your illusion of the sexuality, though, I think why Chris Sarandon is even stronger in the role than, say, a Colin Farrell, who is arguably a very handsome man, is the olderness of Chris Sarandon in this film. He is, like you said, he is more dominant. He is more worldly wise. He's not a pretty boy. He's not a Rob Lowe,
experienced.
Colin Farrell. He's experienced, and he's the kind of guy that the young girl just swoons for, because there's all kinds of issues there that we could go into. But
he's everything that Charlie isn't.
He is. As you can tell, this is a personal favorite of mine, and James enjoyed it as well. 1985's Fright Night is a Halloween spooktacular that we heartily recommend for any Halloween season. But what do you think of it? How does it stack up over the years? How does it compare? Have you seen the remake with Colin Farrell and David Tennant? Let us know what your thoughts are on those comparisons, or on the film in general, in the box below. And as always, James and I are on social media. Feel free to follow us. You'll find the links to Twitter and Instagram in the description box below. James?
Yeah, let us know about your other 80s favorite horror movies, particularly ones which featured lots of practical effects. Was there a Peter Vincent character in your neighborhood, or in your childhood growing up? Let us know about them and where we might be able to see some clips from them. And until next time, I think have a very happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, everybody. Cheers.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.